Brilliant. Well, thank you all for coming. So today we've got a webinar for the Climate Farm Demo project, and we've got James Loder-Symonds from Nonington Farms, who was part of the project, to give a talk about his climate smart friendly practices. So just a few housekeeping rules before we start. The webinar will be recorded and emailed through to you once the webinar has ended. All cameras and microphones will be off throughout the webinar. If you have any questions, please pop them in the chat and we'll come to them at the end. And we've also got a feedback form that will be shared at the end of the webinar, if you wouldn't mind completing that as well. We've got a short poll now, so Lucy, if you could launch the poll, that would be great. And then Beth will talk a little bit about the Climate Farm Demo project.
Megan, can you see the responses from the poll?
Yeah, I can see the responses from the poll, so it looks like
Perfect.
we've got quite a good mix of everyone, which is fantastic. So that's great. Thanks, everyone. And I will hand over to Beth now, who will talk a little bit about the Climate Farm Demo project. So over to you, Beth.
Perfect, thank you. Lovely. So yeah, this is the Climate Farm Demo project. So ADAS is the UK's largest independent provider for agriculture and environmental consultancy, policy advice and research and development. We enable clients to meet their food, climate, land, water and energy challenges. Sorry, Megan, yeah, that's perfect.
Sorry.
So, no, sorry. So the Climate Farm Demo project, a little bit about it. It's got 1,500 pilot farm demo farms and climate smart advisors involved, 28 countries included. It was running from the 1st of October 2022 to the 30th of September 2029. So the aim of the project is to strengthen European farmers' capacities to implement and demonstrate the uptake of climate smart farm demos practices across Europe and reduce GHG emissions by 35%. So as you can see, this shows the locations of the farms working with us for the project. So it's quite vast, nicely spread out. So we're getting a good result in that aspect. So this shows a little bit about what's included in the project. The aim is to exchange farm knowledge and get a better idea about what's going on, participate in annual meetings, host free demo farm walks. There's potential training as well, participate in networked activities with other farms, provide farm data and database and for measuring progress towards AMP objectives, develop and implement and monitor / evaluate an adaptation and mitigation plan with the CFA. So the Climate Farm Demo Project Phase 1 is to organise an in-person meeting and collect all the data that's required for the footprint and produce an adaptation and mitigation plan. This is what we did with James. So I'll now pass over to him and he'll tell you more about his farm. Thanks, Megan.
Brilliant. Thanks, Beth.
Right, good morning, everyone. I'm James Loder-Symonds from Nonington Farms. Thank you to Beth and Megan for all their input on this project. It's ensure that we've delivered it on time, and from my point of view, getting involved in a project like this, we do a lot of work internally and in terms of our carbon footprint, and this project has allowed someone externally to take all the data and to give you a report back and do something independently, which I think is key, particularly on a number of indicators within any business. So a little bit about Nonington Farms. We're transporting you down to East Kent. We're between Canterbury and Dover. I run Nonington Farms with my wife, Emma. We have made a bit of a change in terms of our business recently. We used to be a sort of large-scale contracting operation, sort of covering sort of 1,200 hectares where we did whole farm contracting for people, which meant we did the practical operations as well as doing all the stewardship, the budgeting and the accounts. And we stopped doing this at the end of harvest 25. And we're now sort of farming our own farm and spending all our time on that. So that's sort of where we are at the moment. In terms of a business, we are a leaf demonstration farm. We've been that since June 2020, down to sort of Caroline Drummond's enthusiasm. So that has meant that we have local farmers, politicians, and other people coming down to look at the farm and seeing how you can farm sustainably and moving more to away from a high input system. Let's have the next slide. So in terms of Nonington Farms, our whole sort of USP in terms of a business, we're back in sort of 2017, we moved away from a high input model to more a sustainable farming system. And this was then backed up with us becoming a leaf demonstration farm. And there's three sort of principles about Nonington Farms of how we are as a business. We learn, grow and protect. So the grow element is my sort of forte because I'm an agronomist. And then the learn is my wife, Emma, because she's a teacher. And then the protect bit, we sort of meet halfway in the middle with that. So those are our core values of how our business is and how we, our farming practices are based around that. So just concentrate on the grow bit, which is my real bit that sort of gets me up in the morning. So I am an agronomist, as I've mentioned. At the end of the day, we are food producers. We like to enhance the environment that we're responsible for, but at the end of the day, we are growing food for people. So in terms of our sort of core principles, you've probably all sort of seen this model, but that's since sort of our journey evolved from 2017 to 2018, we've really tried to keep to these core principles. We were, prior to then, you know, we were ploughing, we were putting 300 kilos of nitrogen on, using high levels of, you know, using insecticides, and we were using high levels of fungicides and herbicides. So what we've tried to do is implement the system, and it's meant by having healthy soils that we've managed to reduce our inputs quite dramatically. And in turn, this has helped us with our carbon footprint as well. So the first thing that we implemented, which was sort of an easy win in a way, was the moving away from sort of power harrowing, but cultivating once, twice. And we moved to direct drilling, and we bought a sprinter. We had a grant available which helps fund this. I think it was back in 2020. And this was sort of an easy, it was finding our feet with it. And I think people who are, you know, listening to me speak now, this is a journey that's evolved rather than just happened within a couple of years. And we have tried lots of different things on small scales. Some things have worked and other things haven't, but that's how you develop and improve your farming system. So we started off direct drilling. We direct drilled the beans, and the rape were easy ones. And then we started to integrate on the wheat as well. It was, you know, fairly easy. So linking this back to the point of today in terms of carbon, by having sort of obvious point, but it sort of helps build the picture of how this has all evolved, is that we're doing fewer passes, which means reducing the amount of diesel, which in turn is fossil fuels. So in terms of our journey with our carbon footprint, it's helped. All these small steps have helped reduce it, which I will sort of show you in due course of how our system has improved. So over time, we have tried different things, and we've tried to. I think what the overriding thing for us is when in 2017, profitability wise, we were making a profit, but sometimes we were sort of break even. And this has happened several years, and that sort of helped us question our system, what we were doing. And with this, in turn, we sort of looked at all our fields, and we looked at how we could improve things within the field. And just looking at this field is 40 hectares, and what a vast block, and the hedgerows were taken out, the fences were taken out. So what we did, we, as you can see in the middle of this, you probably can't see, but we reinstated a hedge from one end to another to create a nature corridor. But in turn, we then put a wildflower plot next to it, which many will know, but when we gave up using insecticides back in 5-6 years ago, you can't just do it. You've got to have the infrastructure in order to provide habitat for the beneficials, such as your ladybirds, beetles, and lacewings, to come out from and eat all your bad things such as aphids. So you have to have the infrastructure to do this. So that's what we did in this field. So then again, linking back to carbon, you're not using insecticides, so you're not. So that's helping reduce that. The other thing is we looked at things a bit differently, and we started into implementing blends into our wheats. So we had, so for example, a variety like Crusoe, the millers really like it, and it's really good at converting nitrogen into protein, which is good from a carbon point of view. However, it has a disease weakness in terms of rust. So by putting in another 1 or 2 other varieties that have a strong resistance on rust, meant that we reduced the reliance on using fungicides. And then we went back in time, and I tried some heritage wheat, and again, different mindset. Lower yield, to half the yield of a modern variety, but the price is 3 times more than milling wheat, modern milling wheat varieties today. I will sort of touch on sort of the marketing side of that later on, but hopefully this slide just shows you a complete mindset change of how we've done things within the business. Some things have worked, and other things haven't. Again, back to the slide originally about regenerative farming, about having a living root, living in the soil, being in the soil all the time. Historically, we combine the crop in July, August, and we would work the ground or leave it bare for 2-3 months, depending on what crop was going into it. So all the good stuff, living stuff within the soil, would be, the numbers would drop dramatically. So we changed our system to putting cover crops in. And again, in terms of a soil health point of view, we saw the smell of the soil improved, and excuse me. So that was sort of again an easy win that we started. And in terms of funding, we use our cover crops. We managed to get funding from our stewardship agreement, and also from SFI, but private funding as well. So in terms of economics, we effectively will pay to put the cover crop in. Right. Some of you look at this thinking, oh my goodness, all the different livestock that we've tried. So key to our system is integrating livestock into it. And my wife Emma is the livestock stroke sheep farmer, and I am purely arable, and the thought of putting cows and sheep onto the land in January, February, when it was wet, and the concern of compaction did keep me awake at night. But again, we had a go, and we tried everything apart from, we haven't tried chickens. We tried pigs, which was interesting. We tried the pigs actually in a wildflower meadow, and in terms of the flora that came the following year because of the rootling, it was tremendous. So in terms of a grazing point of view, we tried cows on a cover crop, drilled in end of August, and then we grazed it under the Southern Water scheme from the 15th of January. Again, real concern about compaction. So what we did, we had a local grazier, Chloe from Oikananda. She brought her cows onto the farm, and if you look at the right hand field, you can see that, and what you're looking at is a yield map, and the darker green areas are the higher yielding areas of this spring oat crop. But if you look around the outside of it, the green colours start to wane a bit, and you start to have lower yielding areas. And I take the point that headlands tend to be lower yielding than the main bit of the field, but even so, where you can see to the line where the electric fencing was around the perimeter of that field. So about, was it a third to a half of that green area you can see in the middle is a higher yielding bit. So the cows were moved, so they're mob grazing. So what that means is they were moved daily into different cells. So we started at the bottom and we moved the cows all the way up, and I think we finished at the end of February. There were in places where we didn't move them quick enough because it was wet that day and we couldn't get out. There was compaction, to be honest with you. However, looking at the results of this, the right hand field was grazed and the left hand field wasn't. It just shows you the huge benefit you can get from livestock if you get it right. I would say the key to this is having the right grazier, and they understand your sort of ethos of what you're trying to achieve. Yes, you might be able to get some grazing income, but we actually didn't, because we wanted, the importance for us was soil health, and the damage that could be done by not getting this right could be quite catastrophic. This rotation, this came up in Megan and Beth's report really for us, and it was something to certainly look going forward. We historically had a 4-year rotation of sort of wheat, beans, wheat, rape, and what we found, we had a build-up of grass weeds in particular as a result of this. So we then tried to sort of fox the weeds a bit, and we moved to a sort of 7-8 year rotation. And lots of people say, gosh, what's your rotation? It has a high degree of flexibility depending on the individual problems that we find in fields. But we, again, Emma's lovely Romney sheep on the left hand side, grazing a herbal lay on the fields, that the poorer fields in terms of fertility that we identified through yield mapping. We put a 2-year herbal lay into the system to really try and improve the soil, and putting quite a few legumes in that to putting quite a bit of nitrogen back into the soil, and then having the livestock grazing as well. We're still producing food because we're producing meat, but we're also enhancing the soil by doing it. So then, just in terms of rotation, we moved sort of a wheat, bean, legume fallow, wheat, oats, and then we sometimes did an annual cover crop as well. And we also put, depending on the field, on the fertility levels, if it had high fertility, then we would be growing rape on it as well. So, and if we then, during the rotation, had a problem with weeds, we then move that to a spring crop and put a cover crop in August, graze it, and then prior to drilling, we'd round up in the spring. So then we reduce the grass weed burden. Hopefully you're seeing it isn't one size fits all, and there are many strings to that. How we've tried to achieve our reducing our carbon footprint. And Caroline Drummond was always a great believer that evidence is key. You know, I can talk to you a lot about what we've done, but ultimately it's about being able to say to people that this is the things we've done, this is the evidence, this is the control plot that we did, and this is what we've tried. You know, you can make your mind up if you think it works or not. I think this is a point in terms of, I don't know if you've heard of a well-known soil scientist called Joel Williams. So he looked at how changing your system, particularly this applies to reducing your carbon footprint, is that the first step to reducing your carbon footprint is efficiency. And what I mean by that is only using various inputs if you need to. You know, we came from a system where we were putting 300 kilos of nitrogen on because that's what RB9 told us to do, because the yields that we were achieving, and we did that across the whole farm. And then Joel's second thing was about substituting your product. So rather than using ammonium nitrate, we could be using compost, or we could be using a new waste product from supermarkets. And then thirdly, the final thing was about changing your system, which would be implementing agroforestry into your farming system. So with that sort of backdrop, if you look at the left-hand side and you look at the fertilizer guidance. So now, in terms of our efficiency, every single field is treated differently. We have a broad rotation. However, when we're with nitrogen, taking this one element, we sample every single field NMIN testing in January, February, so that we can identify how much nitrogen's in the bag before we start the season. So in this scenario, you're looking at Beechman's field, the winter wheat for milling. We basically use a system where it's tested, and then Hillcourt Farm then have a model that they put this into. So we use this broadly as our, this was what we will apply during the season. However, we will do variable rate maps during the season. So we're putting the nutrient where it's required within the field. So on the first application, we will be putting slightly more on the areas that haven't tilled as much since being drilled, and then on the second and third we're putting more nutrients on the areas that have got a more higher density of leaf area. So if we just go back to the option, or to the recommendation here, we're putting, what this is saying is we should be putting on 152 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. So if you base that back to our traditional system, 300 kilos, we have reduced our nitrogen in this case by 50%. So in terms of our carbon footprint, that Megan identified, there was at least half. I mean, I knew this anyway, but most people's carbon footprint, half of it is from fertilizer use. So by cutting our nitrogen in half has meant that it's reduced our carbon footprint significantly. The other thing with fertilizer, with our P and K, we do apply sludge within our rotation if the indices are low enough. So we're replacing artificial P&K with organic manures. We haven't applied any P&K artificially through the fertilizer spreader since 2018. And that has had quite a big impact in terms of our crop inputs. You know, we've reduced our crop inputs by at least a third, and this is down solely to quite a lot down to giving up applying artificial P&K and reducing our artificial nitrogen applications. So moving on to the right hand slide, this is just one of our fields, and we have got them variably rate mapped. And looking at White City, what I want to show you here is how particularly the organic matter indices has increased. And this, you know, we started back in December 2018 on a DMAS organic matter rate of 3.3, and then over time we've gone to 4.9 in 2021, and then last August 5.2. So it shows that our system that isn't going in the right way in terms of increasing our organic matter, and that's quite a good indicator for us. And that sort of came through in our report that ADAS did for us. And also it gives us quite a lot of confidence, particularly when the team, that we're doing the right thing. And you know, the evidence is just there to show that we are improving our soil health. I mean, also, if you look at the phosphate, you know, that's improved significantly up to 63. Potash is down a little bit, but again, the magnesium's up. In terms of the other nutrients, we tissue analysis during the season, so to identify any deficiency, and we do apply any some foliar feeds if we need to. Again, putting all these slides together is, you know, soil health is key, and it's all sort of an ecosystem that's combined, and you're pulling lots of different levers to ultimately create success in terms of reducing your carbon footprint. But also, I think a lot of people say, you know, reducing your carbon footprint is about the environmental outcome. I would argue the fact that there is that point, but also I think it's just good economic business sense that if you're only using your inputs when you need to, and you're getting a maximum efficiency from using them, the whole sort of carbon footprint piece is also about having a profitable business, and I think that sometimes gets lost. Certainly, you know, the things that I read. In terms of the insecticides, just looking at that bottom slide, you know, having these beetle banks meant we haven't used any insecticides, and it's lovely seeing lots of ladybirds around the farm. And I'll just share with you, I think it was last year, we had a serious infection of black bean aphid and some winter beans, and you know, it was quite a serious problem. You could, you know, see them from the edge of the field, and it just, what this illustrates is that you have to have the confidence that the system will support you. And in this scenario, we left it, and within 2 days you had this influx of ladybirds and larvae within the crop, and you still had black bean aphids in the crop, but it was a low enough level that the plant wouldn't be affected in terms of yield and quality. So I'm not saying the system is easy, and you just do need to sometimes just let nature do its thing. And there's a lovely picture of, I think it's Button, and then on the right hand side, I'm a favourite of the children. Again, our system is based about literally trial and error. I just wanted to show you this because this is crop of milling wheat, and we grazed it. We grazed only half of it with sheep. And again, this is one of those moments when you put the sheep in and you walked away, but not for too long. So we had the sheep in small 1 hectare cells, and we moved them daily. And then what we felt with this is when they were taken off, the right hand slide shows you thinking about sort of 3 weeks after grazing, and you can see on the right hand side of the footpath and a little bit on the left, about so probably 5 meters in on the left hand side of the footpath, how the crop isn't as lush, and the yield we got was 1/2 ton a hectare more in the area that had been grazed by the sheep, and also the disease levels in the grazed area were significantly lower. And I think it's just taking all the leaves out, and you don't get as lush a crop, so you don't have that sort of microclimate for disease to thrive in. This was another trial that we did with Yara, and it was their sort of system that they had in place in terms of what this showed was by testing the soil and testing the crop, you only fed the crop what it actually needed. And what this showed was by reducing the nitrogen by whatever it was, 36 kilos a hectare, you could still improve the yield and reduce costs. And you think, how on earth do you do that? What you're doing is you're only applying when the crop actually needs it. So rather than just the traditional times when you do apply it, if it was going to be dry, then we ensured that we applied it prior to that. And we also played around with the amount of rates that we put on it each time, and we split it, and we actually did another pass. So we did 4 passes rather than 3. But what that shows is that by looking at it a little bit differently and trying different things, we ultimately increased our margin by £90 a hectare, both in terms of yield and reducing the amount of fertilizer we used, which from a carbon point of view is a good thing. This is an enterprise that we that started in COVID. Well, prior to that, we I'll touch on a bit later, but we do quite a lot of educational visits, particularly for school children, and we had small mills that we got the children to use, and then we built up and had like a tabletop mill that we then produced flour for local bakers or people within the village. And during COVID, there wasn't any flour on our local shops, and we had a barn full of wheat, and we thought, this is bonkers. So we then we bought this mill and installed it, and we never looked back since. And it's this real desire to add value to what we're producing. And then we've produced this sort of range of flours from strong white through to, we also heritage wheat and rye as well. This comes, my real thing is when people talk about farming regeneratively, everyone talks about reducing costs. For me, I also think, look, come on, we need to be marketing our produce that we're producing. It's got high environmental standards. It's highly nutritionally dense food. We should be getting a premium for this. So I got involved with Frontier and Allied, and we were one of sort of the main instigators with getting a sustainable premium per tonne for growing this milling wheat. I think so often as farmers we're producing a product that for the world market, and that we're doing a lot more than just a bog standard product. And then we did this across all, we then did this with rape. So then we weren't just at the perils of the world market, we were actually adding value and getting anything up to at least sort of a minimum of £100 a hectare in terms of premium. A flour mill that we've said about, but also with the farming system we're having more flowering plants. So in terms of cover crops, in terms of wildflower meadows, wild bird crops. So we're having extended flowering periods. So we're producing honey as well. And our beekeeper that we have on the farm said that we're producing 3 times more honey on our farm because of the extended flowering period and the biodiversity we have on the farm compared to a farm that's sort of more a monocultural system. And then you've got the livestock. We talked about the meat from integrating that into our arable system. And the other thing is Jack Scott used to grow vegetables on the farm. So we had this basket full of produce, but the other thing was we had a lot more people involved in the farm, and also brought the average age down to I think about 32, which is good too. But it's, I think so often an arable rotation, you're literally growing the stuff and you're chucking it on a lorry and it's gone. And it's actually quite nice that people having a direct contact with the end consumers. People really value what we are producing, and sometimes I think farmers, we don't feel valued. Income stacking, which is, back to sort of the profit per hectare, is rather than just it's about the base price of things that we're producing. It's about, we can get private funding through, like we talked about, through Southern Water for cover crops, for nitrogen testing, variable rate, fertilizer applications. And then we've got our stewardship that we integrate, SFI, and then grazing income. So you've got all these multi income sources coming into your business rather than just being reliant on one, which is selling your crops, which for us, it's about reducing the exposure to risk. And that was one way of doing it. And then finally, to carbon certificates, we don't sell our carbon credits. For us, we feel that's too long a period to sell. So we sell carbon certificates on an annual basis. I will sort of touch on this a little bit later. This is just an array of Jack's produce, and it's rather nice to see some different colours rather than just the colour of cereals. This is very much sort of Emma's area, but it's being a teacher with her background, it's about educating people about what we do. I think so often as farmers we're detached from consumers, and I think we're maybe a bit afraid to have people on the farm. I personally find this tremendously rewarding, having people on, because people are interested about food and how it's produced, and actually all the good that we're doing for the environment collectively as an industry. I think we do undersell ourselves. So we've been doing educational visits, and we've been doing this, getting a little bit of funding through our stewardship options through educational access. We put this slide in because I think so often people feel detached from where their food comes from, and it's about all of us doing our bit to actually say to people that your food just doesn't come from Tesco's, it actually comes from a farm, and getting them to have some attachment where it comes from. So by getting them onto the farm has meant that they can understand how their food is grown. So we have over 2,000 people through the farm gates every year, doing a range of activities. You can see we've got our own chickens, and then they're planting things, and they're making garlic pesto and other things. There's a real seasonal link to it. not only do we have school children, so we have a complete mixture of people in. We have had local gardening groups, universities, and we've had chefs as well. And so it's a complete mixture. And for us, with this engagement, we get a lot from it because we learn from each other. And it's fun. You know, people want to know what we're doing on farm. And as a result of that, they feel they have an attachment to the things that we grow. So they buy the honey, they buy the flour. They're also planting hedges, and we do a thing with what 3 words so they can come back in time and know that they made a difference. And I think quite a lot of the time some people don't know how to make a difference because they feel that it's quite a closed shop with farms, and the sort of the thing of the farmer going down saying get off my land. I think we certainly found that with people who come on our farm, they feel that their experiences with farmers, or if you ask them to draw what a farmer looks like and their attitude, that sort of very much comes across. And added to that, with children, they are the workforce of the future. We have to engage them in farming. You look at the average age of farmers at the moment. We need to get new people into the farming, and that's very much been our real driver. In terms of the adults, LEAF demonstration one we've talked about. We have through LEAF, we have a scheme where we have environmental agency staff who come onto our farm so that they practically understand that the things facing farmers, and they're more of the mindset now to work together rather than against. And then these photographs here, you've got chefs on the right hand side and bakers on the left, and they have take a lot of pride in what they're producing, and they also want to know they're getting the best ingredients. I put the thing that we've had every political party apart from Yellow, and you might go, oh my goodness. At the end of the day, it's about engagement, and it's about people understanding about the countryside. If you don't do it, then our voice won't be heard. So please do your bit. Right, on final sections on protect. This is sort of underlined with the structure for us to do this is using our countryside stewardship agreement with various options, and how we've achieved this is by looking at our yield maps, seeing that the lower productive areas, and then we've taken them out of production and put wildflowers in there or wild bird covers. So that's the first sort of strand to it, and then the second is the item, the things that we've discussed and previous part of my presentation about reducing nitrogen, which was the key thing. And looking at this, I know it's not, Megan, it's not your graph, but it's what we've done. We've done the Carbon Farm Toolkit for 5-6 years through our leaf mark audit, and it's just showing the trend that we're down on a downward trajectory in terms of our carbon usage, and in terms of this, it's showing that we're carbon negative. And I know lots of people saying have different systems for measuring carbon, but ultimately I think it's about the trend rather than probably the actual figure that you can see. But you can see how emissions have gone down, and in terms of our sequestration, that's predominantly done by us increasing the organic matter in the soil, but planting hedges, planting stewardship, planting trees. All these options have helped us get us into the position that we have, and then we sell the carbon certificates as well. So we're gaining extra money from doing these practices, which again I think is a really good thing that we should be rewarded for what we're doing. I'm running out of time, but just to summarize, in terms of the things that we're protecting, all these things are thriving on the farm. If you create the right habitat, then things will come to you, and this is some of our achievements, and the turtle love is particularly one that we're really proud of. And then we are involved with cluster groups as well, so that helps us do a lot more on a wider scale by being involved with about 20 farms in our cluster group. And then hedge planting I've talked about, and the woodland creation, and it's about getting schools to help us as well, using every single possible pair of hands to help us on the farm. And then we've run courses as well, which again is great, having people coming on the farm and enjoying what we're doing. So that's sort of, hopefully you gained a bit about what we're doing on the farm and what we're doing in terms of our carbon strategy. And again, thank you to Megan and Beth for your help of giving us a plan to work to for the future.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, James. That was a really interesting talk. So now we're going to talk a little bit about ADAS's involvement and how we have delivered the Climate Farm Demo project alongside James. So as Beth mentioned earlier, phase 1 of the project is to do a carbon footprint. For this carbon footprint, we used Agrecalc Cloud, and then we worked with James to produce an adaptation and mitigation plan. So we're just going to talk a little bit about that now. So James's carbon footprint results, I appreciate they're different to the ones that the Carbon Farm Toolkit has produced, but I think we need to bear in mind that every carbon tool is different, and they all produce different results. So the whole farm operational carbon emissions for Nonington Farms, according to Agrecalc, was 148,474 kilos of CO2 equivalent. And with the hedgerows and woodland at the farm, this was enough to offset 66.3% of operating emissions, giving James a net greenhouse gas emissions of 49,783 kilos of CO2 equivalent. So in terms of emission hotspots, when we were looking at the farm, I think we'll all agree that James has done a tremendous amount of work on reducing fertiliser and fuel use. And on an arable system, it is likely that we do see those as the emission hotspots according to the carbon footprinting tools. I think it's just really important that we continue to work together between advisors and farmers to see where we can reduce this even further in the future. And also there's a little bit of emissions associated with food digestion and manure management just from the livestock too. So when we're looking at carbon footprinting results from Agrecalc Cloud, not only do you get the farm results, but you also get the benchmark. So the benchmark is benchmarking the farm against other farms that have had an Agrecalc carbon footprint too. So here are the results for James's wheat. So for crop residues, they are higher, and that's because James is incorporating the straw rather than removing it. So you get more emissions associated with microbial decomposition, which is linked to nitrous oxide emissions. But for fertiliser and manure, pesticides, fuel and electricity, James is either equal to or lower than the benchmark, which is fantastic to see. And he also has lower product emissions overall compared to the benchmark, which is great. And the same for the key performance indicator benchmarking. So again, it's benchmarking against other farms in Agrecalc. So it'll give the farm value and the average too. And again, seed yield is equivalent to, and then fertiliser use, electricity use and red diesel use is all significantly lower than the benchmark, which again is fantastic and reflects James's hard work on trying to reduce these. So in terms of a climate adaptation and mitigation plan, I think because James has done so much work, it's been quite difficult to come up with some recommendations for him, but we've worked together. So the more general sort of recommendations for an arable system would be to implement a no-till system, reduce input use. Well, I think we'll agree that James has already done a lot of work on these areas. So again, working together and seeing where we can try and do this further in the future is really important. But speaking to James, I think it was clear that you'd like to invest in some more modern machinery and precision agriculture technology in the future, which will again reduce input use, and also hosting regular events through the Climate Farm Demo project and also as a leaf demonstration farm. I think the knowledge exchange element of this project is the most important. So thank you so much for coming today and for listening to our talks. I'll stop sharing my screen now, and then we'll get into the Q&A. So the first question is for you, James. So James, you've done a lot of good work. Can you put a value on the extra cost of production, either by hectare or by the tonne?
I would say we've reduced the amount of cost per hectare by a third by implementing sort of regen system that we have done. I would say we probably I'd turn that question on its head and say that we've actually increased our return by certainly 10, probably 20%.
Second question, do you feel that all UK growing systems will have to be high value, and therefore do we see a two-tier market developing? One, UK grown higher value, and two, cheap imported food?
Very good question. I think the UK traditionally has got you know, a high environmental standards and nutritionally dense. I think that it depends very much on government policy. I think if government policy is encouraging a certain proportion of our food being produced in the UK or locally to that, you know, school or hospital, I think that will have a big impact. In terms of the market, I think yes, there will be I think you're right in terms of I think there will be sort of a high food standards market from the UK, and I think you can see that now actually, you know, and you know what governments are doing at the moment is cheap imports in order to keep, you know, to help with the cost of price living crisis. So, but I think it's about us selling the benefits of having more sort of highly nutritional dense food rather than a low cost crop that's coming in that hasn't got as many nutrients and in terms of health wise isn't as good for you.
And then another question, James. So the soil pH on your soil data slide looks like it is also increasing year on year. Have you noticed any impact from this, good or bad?
So that's in terms of organic matter.
I think it's just any impact in general.
I think in terms of the soil, the smell and the colour of the soil, we've certainly noticed that has improved, and the filtration within the soil through the sort of network of roots and also earthworm casts. We've certainly noticed that. I think it's more probably the colour of the soil that's improved or changed.
Perfect. And then just a couple of questions from us, James. So what were your main reasons for participating in the Climate Farm Demo project, and have you found the results useful so far?
Because yes, I have found the results useful because it's given us a bit of a structure to our plan, and it's good at holding us to account, Megan. So I found that. And sorry, the other part of the question.
Have you found results useful so far?
I have, yes. Again, I think you can debate the different system in terms of the crop residues, but I think the fact that it's independent, again, holds quite a lot of credibility.
And going forwards, what would you like to get out of the project?
Keep reducing our carbon footprint is ultimate, and in turn with that is improve the soil health that we have within the farm.
Yeah, I think it's just a case of working together, isn't it, and having that collaborative approach between farmers and advisors. It's really important. And then just one last question before we end the webinar. So James, the graph that you presented of the results of your carbon footprint from the Farm Carbon Toolkit, which management practice do you think contributed to bringing down emissions the most? Was it trees as woodland, or was it integrating crops?
The sequestration from increasing the soil organic matter had a massive impact. I think it's also the reducing of the fertilizer by 50%. I think that was probably the key driver on that.
Brilliant. Well, that's great. Thank you very much for everyone's time this morning, and thank you to James, who did a fantastic talk. We hope you found this useful. There will be a link sent through to a feedback form at the end, so if you'd like to complete that, then that would be great. But thank you so much for coming, and hopefully we'll see you again for another webinar.
Bye now.